Death always signifies a loss. Now, there are things you lose that you don't really care for. A few years ago, I walk into my house, and for some strange reason, the lights were on. And I asked my wife, "Did you leave the lights on?" She says, "No." And you come to realize that the windows are broken, the doors are broken into, and most of the things you had were gone. It's such an invasion. And you realize the security, stability that you thought you had, they're all gone. And then it's difficult sleeping at night. And then you call ADT and AAA and GAY to kind of come forth and fix whatever it is that needs fixing. Now, because at that time I had some cash on hand, I didn't really care for the properties. I still had the privilege, the luxury of having sufficient power in life, physical power, to replace all the stolen goods. And so even though there was loss, emotionally I was not really connected. So the first thing about loss is that all of us in this class lose things. The question is, what is your relationship to the item lost? If I have never loved my father and all of a sudden I get this news that my father died, am I going to be sad? Absolutely. Am I going to be mad that he didn't ever call me? Yes. Am I going to be mad that I never called him to make peace? Yes. And it may linger around for a day or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 weeks, but because there was really no intimacy, the loss is not going to break me, paralyze me, force me to contemplate about my own life. Now, so the first thing about loss is, how intimate were you? If you were profoundly intimate, then instead of being depressed for 2 days, you're going to be depressed for 2 weeks, maybe 2 months, maybe 2 years, maybe you'll never recover. That's the first thing about loss. So every loss has its own degree of grief. Now, the problem with grief and sadness and sorrow is that loss can cause, depending again on the relationship, it's a traumatic experience. Trauma creates pain. Pain, like a really, really good toothache, pushes you into being absolutely alone. You can't put your pain in language. You may want someone to sit next to you, but you want their mouths to be shut. You don't want to hear them. So that's what pain does. It makes you very, very, very alone. And despite the fact that you want to reach out and talk to someone, vent, there is no one who's out there to understand you. هر کسی از ظن خود شد یار من و از درون من نجست اسرار من. My secret is that I just suffered a loss. I am grieving. I am sad. And I want to talk to someone about it. The problem is, when I talk to Amir about I lost my father, he says, yes, I also lost my watch. He wants to give me his perspective. I didn't share my story to hear your perspective. I'm just venting, but I don't want to hear your mouth. And that's what Rumi says. Right? Everybody thinks that they can understand when in fact they can't. So in that sense, you're going to be very alone. Now again, depending on how this death came about, my father is sick and slowly getting sicker and sicker and sicker. It's like a frog slowly being cooked in this pot of water and slowly gets warmer and warmer, and then it gets hot and it's boiling and the frog is dead. It's very different than I'm expecting to go to Roseville and see my father and then going on a long walk with him. I go there and it comes to me as a shock. He's dead. So a shock is very, very different than a gradual process. If it's gradual, that gradual process will force readiness upon you. It's like anything else. You don't like broccoli, your mom mashes it, puts it in a soup, you don't even know it's there. Then she gives it to you in a different form. And your taste buds are slowly, gradually adjusting. Then one day she puts this like raw flour on your plate. Eat it. I hate broccoli. She says, you know, for the past 2 years, I've been feeding you broccoli. And now you put the broccoli in your mouth. So, wow, it's delicious. So it depends how this loss came about. Now, one of the things about grief and pain and loneliness is that we don't like pain. So we want to come out of pain. And the problem is you can't. Again, no one can make the grass grow by pulling it. You can't force someone to fall in love with you. You can't force pain to go away. It doesn't work. And because you struggle to find the pieces to make pain go away, but it refuses, a different branch comes out of grief, and that's called anger. Not only are you angry, the grief that you're going through, you're also angry because you find life to be unfair, you find life to be unjust. You were just getting to make this relationship work with your father, and life took your father away. If you had any beliefs or faith in God, that goes away. You're mad at this whole thing called life. You got two problems now. You have the loss, you have the grief, and now you have the anger. Now, all of these different emotions become more and more intense as time goes on, and you feel the weight of them more, and it makes you more alone, and the pain increases tenfold. Now, one of the things that keeps you from internalizing the experience and finding your life to be completely meaningless is that you have two kids, and they are your messiahs. Every time you want to, or this grief wants to suck you into its depression, your kid will come, Mom, can we go to Chuck E. Cheese? And you may yell, you may scream. At a certain point, you realize that they're at no fault. Say yes. And little by little, they bring you out of grief. And just in case you have a foul mouth and you get really, really angry, to protect your kids, you kind of zip it a little. So having people on the outside who depend on you can shorten the life of grief and anger. But just in case grief has gone like to the very core of who and what you are, and you can't escape it, before you get to the point of anger, I have lost my dad, I've lost my brother or my sister or my child, and then you take that and you put it inside, within the context of yourself. The grief now becomes a mirror into which you look at yourself and you say, what am I doing with myself? If life can take me into the land of Hades, this dark place, at any time, do I really want to take these lousy classes? Now, remember, one of the things about death is that it really, for the most part, removes future away from you. You have no future. Death has like a good vacuum cleaner. It has just swallowed everything in itself. There is no past, there is no future. All you have is the present. And the present is this empty bucket. Now, the only reason why we don't go mad is because we have narratives from the past we're playing with, and we have narratives from the future we're playing with. Our life is full of stuff. It may be shit, but it's full of stuff nevertheless. Death empties all of it. It's like a plunger. And you look inside, there is nothing. The past has become irrelevant. The future has become irrelevant. Now you have this huge space called the present. What do you put in it that you can find meaning? Nothing. Death will not allow anything. Now, if you happen to be like the Buddha, you say, you know what, screw life, it's not worth it. I'm going to go out there and look for wisdom if there is such thing. Because there is nothing under the sun worth pursuing. If you happen to be mean, you say, I hope this passes. You know, the story you have in the Mosaic tradition, that when death comes to them, they put this blood around their door, that none of us in this class desire death to come our way. And so we'll try to do whatever we possibly can to fend it off. At certain points when you've had enough grief, and remember, the timetable for each of these stages, unknown. Sometimes people live in grief for about 10 years, sometimes 10 days, sometimes 10 hours, sometimes 10 minutes. People have different capacities and they deal with things differently. Let's just say it takes you a month to overcome grief, and now you find yourself in the cradle of anger. And your essays are filled with profanities, your friends call you, you pick up the phone, but you're unsavory. You know, you say things to them that angers them, and then that makes you angry because the brain is just filled with concrete. And then you go to the next stage, which is you go home and there is no one home. And you get in a fetal position and you just cry. And you say, God, let this cup pass by me. I can't do this anymore. I'll be good to my kids. I'll take school seriously. I'll make life more meaningful. I just don't want to go through this again. Now comes your bargaining stage. And you realize the bargaining doesn't work. Okay? And that's the thing. You want a way out of this mess, and grief says no. I will go when I'm ready, not when you demand. And you realize it's not working. It doesn't matter what you suggest to life. Life says no. I'm not going to take this grief away. You're going to live with grief, anger, and all your clever ways of trying to overcome it. It's not going to happen. And then when you realize you have no more chips, you have nothing to bargain with, you get really, really depressed because you have zero power. And that's what grief does. Whatever power you thought you had, it is removed. And there comes a point where, and I don't know how this happens, and I don't think anyone knows, there comes a point where you say, my dad died, and I'm really sad. There isn't much I can do. I know that once in a while I will remember my father in good spirits, And I'll be sad, I'll cry, I'll probably go into my room. I don't want to see my kids, I don't want to talk to anyone. But I accept the fact that this is what happens in life. And then one of the nice things about being us is that regardless of the intensity of any trauma, our body and our mind, these machines, will do whatever they possibly can, with or without your consent, to forget, to numb the experience, to lessen its intensity. And then what will happen is you think about your father first 20 hours a day, then 15 hours a day, then once a day for 10 minutes, then once every other day, then once every 2 weeks, then once every month. Then as you remember less, you're visiting the cemetery, a tiny little plot that you purchased becomes less and less and less. And then like once every 2-3 years, you look at the kids and say, listen, let's go to the cemetery. And then you have his picture on the mantle. And then after some time you say, you know what, that picture doesn't really belong there. And then you just put it in the box, put it in the garage. And once in a while you think of him. That's how we deal with this stuff. Can I tell you a story? And this story comes from one of my favorite books, Siddhartha. You know, here you have a kid, turns his back to his father and says, I'm going to go out to look for wisdom. He comes to realize it can't be found, not at least the way he's doing it. But then he goes and finds a woman, runs into a woman whose name just happens to be Kamala. They have lots of sex. She teaches him the art of love, which is really interesting. And there comes a point where he loses interest in her and sex and all the fun that they would have. He walks away. He runs into her 20 years later, only to realize that, or maybe 10 years later, only to realize she got pregnant. And this is his son. She's not dead. The son doesn't like the father. The son doesn't like the father's wisdom. The son doesn't like being a monk. The son doesn't like anything that has to do with forest life. The son likes to live in Oakland, by Lakeshore. He wants to have fun. And he tries to educate his son, but he has a friend, Siddhartha does, whose name is Vasudev, and says to him, listen, don't run after him. There comes a point when the son runs away, and Siddhartha goes to look after him. He's the father, he wants to protect his son. And Vasudev says to him, this is not his life. Your father couldn't save you. You can't save your son. And then Siddhartha doesn't listen to his best friend. He gets on this raft, the river begins to speak to him. And he comes to realize that sometimes you have to allow things, or you have to just let go of things, and you have to accept life for what it is. He has come to realize that his son is created from a different cloth. He's made for the city. He himself, as the adult man that he is, he's made for the forest. And these are very, very different worlds. And all of a sudden he comes to accept it. He struggled for many, many weeks or months, but eventually he accepted. And he realized that all parents go through the loss of their children, if not physically, certainly emotionally, intellectually. They have no choice but to be disappointed. That's the lot that parents occupy. Parents have no choice but to constantly be disappointed by their kids. Accept that. So when acceptance comes, no one knows. But, knowing the steps as to what comes after which, it won't be very helpful. However, knowing them a little, thinking about them a little, reflecting on them a little, can lessen the impact that any kind of pain and suffering can have on your psyche and your physical life.